Hello my friends, and welcome to the second episode of our journey. Originally I was thinking that I would spend some time in this episode talking about scales, and I will get to that subject. But having received some informal reviews of my first episode, it seems that I talk too much. And so in this episode we're going to get directly into how to do some important things for the miniaturist. Welcome to what we call the way back. This is a storage area in our house, and it also is the site of my miniature workshop, or at least the machine tool part of the miniature workshop. We'll be spending some time out here as we go along, but for today there's one thing in particular I want to show you, and it is this bin. This is my stash. These are pieces of wood that I use to make miniatures, and I want to draw your attention to these bundles, which are basswood. They come in different thicknesses, and this stuff is available. Miniatures.com handles it. Northeast Lumber makes most of it. It works quite well for us because it's available in several thicknesses. Now in the bin above we see some cherry, and it also has been made into specific thicknesses in order to be useful in the making of dollhouse furniture. But you can't buy it that way. I had to make it that way. And this is what this episode is going to cover today, is how to go about doing that. Also, you'll see in the bottom bin a variety of thicknesses of black walnut. These are my two favorite woods to work with. While basswood is very useful, it doesn't have the beauty that these woods have. So that you may appreciate that it is in fact a beautiful wood. This is the kind of stuff that furniture would be made of. Basswood, on the other hand, is certainly not ugly, but it is kind of featureless. And so we would prefer something nicer, but you just can't get it in these handy thicknesses. And so today I'm going to show you how to make it yourself, assuming that you have the equipment to do so. Welcome to the Big Boy Shop. What we have here is, I think, 50 years of accumulation of tools and machines and junk and scraps of lumber and really good lumber, and this is my current shop. It's in the barn of our home. When we bought this place, one of the selling points for me was that it had this nice big barn that I could turn into my woodworking shop. That was 35 years ago. This bench, we generally refer to as the center bench, was the first bench that I made. It is made from a plan that was published in Wood magazine. Wood magazine, I think, is a publication of Better Homes and Gardens. It has a pretty ingenious end vise, which is right here. This is the hardware for a bar clamp. This is a bar clamp. It's made out of a piece of pipe and these pieces of hardware, and so this is what I would use to put together a large carcass for a large piece of furniture. a cabinet or something. There's a little handle back here which I press to release the tension on the other end of the mechanism, and that allows me to pull this out to whatever distance I need it to be. And you'll see there are holes for what are called dogs here and on down. So a very large panel, a door, could be held on there. These are examples of the dogs that are used for this vise. Piece of wood goes right up against this. This one wants to drop on through. It's a little loose. And there are ones here, and I can hold a single board, or I can put two sets of these in and hold a broader panel. What we're going to attempt to do today is to prepare some stock for making miniatures. As you'll see in other episodes, you can buy stock already carefully and precisely thicknessed, but really the only wood that you can get in that form is basswood. And basswood has some great characteristics. Beauty is not one of them. What we have here are two pieces of hardwood. This is walnut and this is cherry. Walnut has a grain that's a little heavy for miniatures, but I like to use it because I just like how it looks. Cherry is one of the ideal woods for making miniatures. These pieces were gifted to me. If you're in this kind of hobby or practice for very long, keep your eyes and ears open. Once in a while somebody will give you something. Most of the stock that I have now was gifted to me by a couple of different people. So we don't use huge quantities of wood for making miniatures. If these were priced out at the price of cherry and walnut, we might have $50 worth of wood here. If you wanted to make an entire full-sized cabinet out of these woods, it wouldn't be unusual for you to pay several $100s just for the stock. So making small things has its financial advantages. Woodworking often involves some repair and fettling. As we're preparing to join these pieces of wood that I showed you, we realized that our dust collection system has some gaps in it. So we're going to reattach it with some fresh duct tape. This may be one of the most important tools in the shop. This is a machinist's square, and we're going to check some things on the table saw before we use it as well. What I'm checking is that the fence is square to the table. I'll be putting the piece of wood up against that fence when I cut the second surface, and these things need to be square in order for our results to end up square. We begin by turning on our dust collection system, and from now on it's going to be noisy. What you'll see me do is to pass these pieces of wood over the jointer and then pass them a second time, and what we'll end up with are two faces that are flat, straight, and square to each other. And those will be our reference points as we continue the process of making our wood. Checking the direction of the grain so that I get as smooth a cut as possible. These two sides seem to be the flattest already, and so I'm going to start with one of those. The grain here we can see, because we've got some sapwood and some heartwood, the grain runs uphill this way. And so the best way for us to flatten this is going to be to feed it through in this direction. So here we go. on planing this surface, and I'm going to hold this surface that we just created against this flat fence, which theoretically should give us a square meeting of these two flat surfaces. So now it'll be important for me to hold pressure against this fence as I pass this through. Most of the length we're good here. We ran into the same problem where our board began to lift off of the cutters towards the end. This is an indication that these two tables are not parallel with each other. There are adjustments that can be made. They have not been made on this machine for some time, and so it's a little out of fettle. But I'm deciding that this is going to be pretty good for our purposes. And one of the things that we have established, which will ease our work on the table saw, is that these two mostly flat surfaces are square to each other. The block is tight against this surface, and I can see no light under the blade of my square on this surface. As you will hear from me many times, the things that matter here are that our stock and our final pieces that go into pieces of furniture or into a dollhouse are flat and straight and square. This is flat and it's straight up to here where we didn't cut into that wood. This is flat and it's straight up to about here. And these two surfaces are square to each other. So we have the good basis for the next steps. This is my chop saw table, and with this piece of walnut I've decided that I can handle it easier. I'm more likely to get a flat square surface on the jointer if I'm dealing with shorter pieces of wood. I'm kind of ashamed to cut a nice piece of wood like this, but it's going to be easier to manage when I do. So here we go. This process is called joining. It prepares surfaces to be joined. if I were to put another flat board, one that had been joined, on top of this with glue, those surfaces would match perfectly. So that's why this is called a joiner, and this process is called joining. This is the first surface that we did. And so we mark this, can't see that very well, with a curly Q like that. That tells us this is our flat surface. And then when we have created a surface that is square to that, we mark that like that. So this is a prepared piece of wood. It is now ready to be put through the table saw. And we're going to do the same thing. We're not going to have you watch all of it with these pieces of walnut and maybe some other pieces of cherry that I have over there. It's a warm day and I'm sweating. If you sweat and you drip onto a machined cast iron surface, wipe it up right away or this will rust. Our next operation is going to take place on the table saw. This is probably the most important machine in the shop. This is a Powermatic Model 66. This is a T-square rip fence, and I wore out the side of it and replaced it with a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. And what we're going to be doing today is called resawing. Resawing is cutting with the grain of the wood but with the wood on edge, so that what we're producing is a wide piece of narrow wood, narrower than the original piece. If we were to cut this piece of wood this way, that would be called ripping. We're going to be using a thin kerf saw. This saw makes about a 1/16 of an inch kerf. That's the amount of wood that is wasted. This is a carbide tipped saw, so all these little teeth are made of carbide, a very hard and brittle substance, and they are brazed onto the steel blade. One of the things that we're going to do for this operation is to use a different table insert. This one has a very wide slot, which is going to increase the degree to which we get rip out. You can buy these inserts. This is called a zero clearance table saw insert. And when you buy this, it doesn't have a groove in it. You basically put it in place with the blade lowered down below the table and raise the blade through it to make the slot. We know when we do resawing that we're going to have to raise our blade quite a bit. Even at that height, this is not going to go all the way through the wood. One way that we can accommodate that is to cut the wood from either side. Cut it from the bottom, flip it over, cut it from the top. Another way that we can do this is to cut most of the way through. Let's see how close we can get. This is not going to cut all the way through, so we may cut that far and then we'll have a bunch of narrow pieces of wood on this side. They'll all be connected on this side. We'll just rip that edge off, and then we'll have a bunch of thin pieces. So we're going to give that a try. One of the disadvantages of resawing on the table saw is that especially hard wood like this may burn. And this is walnut. The cherry will be even worse because cherry is a resinous wood, and it's the resin in the wood that tends to burn. We're going to see how this goes. We're not going to take that big a bite to start with. And I have a couple of miniature tools here. This is my measuring stick, and what I'm going to try to accomplish here is to set my fence in order to leave just a small amount. And right there I would be cutting 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to increase it just a little bit. That's too much. And now I will have some thickness to remove with the thickness planer. We aren't cutting to the thickness that we want here. We're cutting something a little thicker, and then we'll sand it down to the exact thickness that we want. This is kind of an amazing grain here. So we're going to start with a cut that doesn't go all the way through. This is our flat side. It will go against the fence. This is our flat and square side. It will go against the table. One of the most important things to maintain in a shop like this is the flatness of your table saw table. You use that as a reference for many things. Right now we're using it as a reference for square and straight with this piece of wood. I shouldn't need any kind of push stick because the saw is not coming all the way through the wood. I do need to keep my hand away from the end here where the blade is going to emerge. But I can grab right a hold of this and push it through like that with no danger. I am not using a splitter, which would normally go here, because you can't use that when you're not sawing all the way through a piece of wood. If you're sawing all the way through a piece of wood, that's a real important safety device. I've made a sacrificial push stick. This has been made out of plywood, and it's gotten cut down and cut down and cut down over the years. It still is going to keep my knuckles away from the blade, and this is what we will use to push things through. The blade will cut into this, but there'll be enough of it left, the amount that's in that gap, that it'll push the piece through for us. So let's try this piece of walnut. This is our flat side, this is our flat edge, so that's what goes up against the side here. Now we're going to have to do this by sawing through from both sides. And so we want a height that's more than half, but just. less burning if we can keep moving. Transitioning and pushing it. But the things get dangerous when you get down to this thickness. So I'm actually going to thickness sand this piece into a thicker piece of stock, which sometimes you have use for thicker stuff. Now we've got quite a bit of walnut cut here and a little bit of cherry. So I'm going to go for some more cherry. We have a 16th of an inch kerf, and we want to make 1/8 of an inch pieces. So we want to move this over
3/16,
3/16, I believe.
plus a little bit because we want a little more than 1/8.
So we're at 4 millimeters. There's our 1/8 and a little bit, and there's another 1/8 and a little bit, and that's a little bit more. Let's see how it looks by eyeball. That's going to leave too thick of a piece. So come back a little bit. That looks about right. What do you think? So this is tedious and inexact. That's one of the disadvantages of this. But we have moved our saw now. So we're not going to get the same thickness anymore. Let's run this through as a way of trying this method. Now we can cut off this part and we'll have separate pieces of wood. It's a little wasteful. What you gonna do? Okay. Look about right. The precision does not matter here because we're going to get our precision on the thickness sander. Got these set it up a little bit thinner. Pretty close. It's a venerable saw. The good thing about this method is that it's easy to keep your fingers out of the way because we're not sawing all the way through. Also, it's easier to keep things moving, and so my guess is when we cut this open we'll find that we have less burning. Let's call this good enough. Now what we're going to do is to cut these off. So what I want is for the saw blade to be just the height of that last piece there. And I want the fence to be set so that I've just cut these off. Now this piece of wood is going to want to fall down. It won't have the support that it has here. I'm going to need to keep it tight against the fence rather than against the table because it's not going to have any support out here. A little bit of waste, not too bad. So we have some more cherry to work with. Not bad for burn. Okay, let's do the next operation. Another way to resaw wood is with the bandsaw. This fence keeps the piece of wood parallel to the saw as it cuts. This is a piece of wood that we ran through there. This is what's left. So we would put it through again like that to cut another slice. It worked okay, but it went very slowly. And the reason for that is that this is a regular bandsaw blade. It has a tooth every 3/8 of an inch or so. In order to cut through a piece of wood this thick, you would want to have what is called a skip tooth blade. And it would have a blade for about every 5 that you see here. The advantage of that is that it allows the sawdust to clear. It is the buildup of sawdust in the perf that makes this go slowly. But if you get the right kind of blade and you have a bandsaw, you can do your resawing this way. There's less burning, and I think there's less waste because this blade is quite a bit narrower than any table saw blade.
Okay.
This is a piece that we cut off our block, and 1/8 of an inch thickness would be right here on the dial where it says 8. Those are 64ths. So that's what we would aim for 1/8 of an inch. This currently is a little bit thicker than that, which is good. We have some wood to take off, which will allow us to take off some of these original sawmill saw marks and the burn that we have. This is our newest piece of equipment in the shop. This is a thickness sander made by Jet. This is their smallest model. It's regarded as a benchtop model. I will not call it a portable model because I just lifted it up here with the help of Jenny and It does not lift easy. It's about 75 pounds. So the first thing that we're going to do is to take off a little bit of wood from all of these pieces and see where that leaves us. And in general, we're going to want to run it through the sander on one side and then on the other side. And the result will be that the piece of wood will be parallel. It'll be the same thickness all the way across, and we'll be able to get rid of any flaws that we have, because we'll probably have some flaws on both sides. Anyway, we're going to bring all of these down to the same thickness.
Alright.
There are two operations here. This turns on the belt, and we will start it out relatively slowly. And this turns on the drum. The sandpaper on the drum, I think, is 180 grit, fairly coarse sandpaper. But sandpaper that's being run by a power tool like this leaves a smoother surface relative to the grit of the sandpaper. Now, this piece of wood has run through all the way at the same grit. Some of our burn marks are gone. Here's a little bit of a saw mark that remains. But much of our unevenness has been taken off. The next time we put this through, it'll be cranked down a bit more, and we'll put it through on that side and get rid of our imperfections here. It makes sense to check every time you change the setting that you haven't gone beyond where you want to go. And right now we are a 64th and a half of a 64th thicker than the 1/8 that we're aiming for. Leave this wood the way that it went through the machine, right there, and grab our next piece. I always try to start with the side that looks the worst, so I get rid of more imperfections. Now, we can run more than one piece of wood at a time. They need to be staggered. This entire process produces pieces of wood that are not real wide, but keep in mind, we're making miniatures here. So they probably don't need to be very wide. This is the one piece that we cut on the bandsaw, and as you can see, it's got lots of marks from the bandsaw, but it's of a pretty even thickness. So we're going to put this through just like the rest of the pieces. Now, everything that we just did, we're going to do again. You have to have a system to keep things straight. Know what you've done and what you haven't done. We're going to crank things down a quarter of a turn. And after I run these first couple of pieces, we'll take a measurement and see where we are. We are stopping with these. We've gotten them to 1/8 of an inch, and that's where we're going to leave them. And we're going to go thinner with some more pieces.
So these are going through on another board now because they're so very thin.
Yeah, we don't want the the sanding drum to come in contact with the sandpaper belt. So now this one we're going to have to get exactly right front to back or it won't have support. So when it comes out your end, clamp it to the board with your fingers and keep it pulling. So just in case it wasn't clear, we kept cranking the drum down closer and closer to the belt that was carrying the wood through until we got the exact sizes that we needed. We ran everything through until everything was 1/8 of an inch thick, and then we set some aside that we wanted to keep at 1/8 of an inch, and we ran the rest of it through until we had everything down to 3/32 of an inch, and then we set some more aside, and then we ran everything through until we got down to 1/16 of an inch. In order to get down to 1/16 of an inch, we ran our wood through the thickness sander on top of a 1/4 inch piece of plywood, because we didn't want to get the drum down that close to the belt that was carrying the pieces of wood through. So we had to crank it back up in order to do that. And then we made quite a number of pieces of wood that were 1/16 of an inch. And then with 2 pieces of wood, I attempted to make a couple of pieces that were 1/32 of an inch thick. You may not have the equipment to do what we have done here, and you may be able to find somebody who can do this kind of part of the work for you. If not, don't despair. There's much that you can do with basswood, which is available in all of these precise thicknesses. And we're going to be showing you how to do that later on. Hopefully, this will have been interesting for you at least, to see how I make wood in the right thicknesses. That is the kind of wood that I like to use, especially for furniture. So we'll see you next time.